To the outside world, Officer Daniel was the model cop, distinguished, respected, and untouchable. But what no one knew was that behind the polished reputation, Daniel was a man who would betray his own to protect his secrets. His actions were cloaked in deceit, and those who trusted him most were about to pay the price. For years, Daniel had carefully hidden his true identity as a corrupt cop, feeding information to the very cartel that had been causing chaos across the city. No one suspected him. After all, he was the best cop in the department, a favorite of the police chief himself. But all that was about to change. If you're interested in uncovering the truth, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. For years, Officer Daniel had been leading a double life. By day, he was the department's shining star, tackling cases, making arrests, and gaining the trust of his colleagues and the community. But by night, Daniel was something entirely different. He was in bed with the very criminals he was meant to take down. Behind closed doors, he secretly fed vital information to a dangerous drug cartel, ensuring their operations ran smoothly and without interruption. No one had ever suspected him, not even when he began to rise through the ranks. He was a master of deception, always staying one step ahead of the law, all while maintaining his spotless record. In the eyes of the police chief, Officer Daniel could do no wrong. The chief had always been loyal to his top cop, blind to the darker side of Daniel's success. Daniel was the go-to guy for every important case. His arrests were flawless, his strategy impeccable, and his charm unmatched. The chief didn't question Daniel's methods or his sudden rise to the top. To him, Daniel was a shining example of what it meant to be a good cop, a man who represented the department with honor. But the truth was that Daniel was feeding him lies, masking his connection to the cartel while securing his place in the department's hierarchy. No one dared challenge him, not even the chief. The city was on the brink of chaos. The drug cartel that had been operating under the radar for so long was now leaving its mark everywhere. Overdoses, gang violence, and drug-related crimes were becoming a daily occurrence. The cartel's influence had spread like a poison through the streets, and the police department was losing ground in the fight. Every operation to take them down seemed to fail, and every lead went cold. The citizens of the city were desperate for change, but the department was helpless. What no one knew, however, was that the very officer who was supposed to be taking down the cartel had been protecting them all along. Daniel had been feeding the cartel vital information, ensuring that their operations continued without interruption. With the cartel's influence spiraling out of control, the police chief knew drastic measures were needed. In a department meeting that would go down in history, the chief made a bold announcement, one that would send ripples through every officer in the room. The officer who successfully captured the elusive kingpin of the cartel would be rewarded with a promotion and a significant pay raise, a prize too tempting for anyone to ignore. The chief's announcement was a turning point. Suddenly, the stakes had never been higher. Every officer in the department now had something to strive for, and the competition to bring down the kingpin was on. But little did they know, the very man who had the most to gain was the one already in bed with the cartel. The thought of a promotion consumed Daniel. For years, he had worked tirelessly to earn the top spot in the department, but now the reward for capturing the kingpin seemed within his reach. Daniel was no stranger to bending the rules, but this time he saw an opportunity to take it to a whole new level. The promotion would solidify his place at the top, and the pay raise would bring him the power and comfort he'd always dreamed of. His desperation for recognition was beginning to cloud his judgment. No longer content with simply maintaining his facade, Daniel was willing to risk everything to seize this chance. Daniel's desperation quickly turned into a plan. He knew that if he was going to get the promotion, he needed to make a high-profile bust, something that would impress the chief and secure his place in the spotlight. So, he devised a plan to frame an innocent person. He would plant drugs on someone, arrest them for drug trafficking, and present it as a victory. It was a calculated move, one that Daniel was sure would work without a hitch. He just needed to find the perfect person to target, someone who would be easy to accuse and hard to defend. He needed a scapegoat, and he wasn't going to let anything stand in his way. Officer Daniel's eyes scanned the street, searching for the perfect target. It wasn't about suspicion or a real lead, it was about convenience. As soon as Daniel saw a black man driving alone in a car that didn't match any descriptions of the cartel members, he knew he had found his mark. The man wasn't doing anything wrong, but Daniel had already decided. In his mind, this man was going to be his ticket to the promotion. His instincts, based on racial profiling, told him that the color of the man's skin made him the ideal scapegoat. Daniel approached with the quiet confidence of someone who knew he could get away with anything, believing no one would question his actions. Daniel initiated the traffic stop with the intent to make it as difficult as possible for the man. He asked irrelevant questions, probing into areas that had nothing to do with the stop, just to throw the man off balance. His goal was clear: to provoke a response that would justify escalating the situation. The man, confused and cooperative, tried to answer Daniel's questions, but Daniel kept pushing. He was creating the narrative he wanted to tell, one that would make it easier to plant the drugs later. Every word and movement was designed to make the situation seem more suspicious than it truly was. Daniel had already decided that this man was going to be arrested, no matter the cost. Officer Daniel's heart raced, but his hands were steady. He knew that if he was going to make this look convincing, he had to be careful. As the man stood there, compliant yet confused, Daniel quickly glanced around. The street was empty, and the only sound was the low hum of the passing traffic. He had been in this position many times before, but this time it was different. This wasn't just about making an arrest. It was about securing a future, a promotion that would elevate him above the rest. With a subtle movement, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small bag of white powder, drugs that had been planted for just such an occasion. He paused for a moment, studying the man's face, watching him shift uncomfortably under the heat of the situation. Daniel knew the man was innocent, but that didn't matter. He needed to make this work. He bent down, pretending to tie his shoe, and slipped the bag of drugs beneath the seat of the man's car, right where it would be easy to find. The man would never see it coming. Once the drugs were in place, Daniel stood back up, his mind already turning over the steps for the next phase. This was it. The frame-up was complete. Daniel felt a fleeting moment of satisfaction. He had set the trap. Now all he had to do was wait for the right moment to make the arrest. And then the promotion would be his. As he stood tall, a cold smile crept onto his lips. He knew that the innocent man would never be able to fight back. He had no idea what was coming for him. The tension in the air was thick as Officer Daniel approached the man, whose hands were now shaking slightly, trying to process the bizarre turn of events. Daniel ignored the man's nervous energy, all the while playing the role of the stern, no-nonsense officer. He felt the power in his hands as he readied himself to make the arrest. "You're under arrest," Daniel said, his voice cold and firm, the words landing like a heavy hammer. The man looked at him with confusion, clearly not understanding what was happening. His eyes widened as Daniel continued, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The man opened his mouth to speak, but Daniel cut him off. "Save it. You're guilty." He moved swiftly, grabbing the man's arm and jerking it behind his back with an almost practiced force. The man winced, pain flashing across his face, but Daniel wasn't concerned with the man's discomfort. This was business. He was executing a plan that would not only secure his promotion but also get rid of someone who didn't deserve the dignity of a fair process. As he marched the man toward his patrol car, Daniel didn't look back. He could feel the man's eyes boring into him, confusion and fear mixing together. It didn't matter. The arrest was made. The drugs were in the car. There was no going back now. Daniel had done it. He threw open the door of the patrol car and shoved the man inside, hearing the sound of the metal creaking as the door slammed shut. It was final. The arrest was complete, and nothing would stop him from getting what he wanted now. Not the man in the back seat, not the truth. Daniel stood there for a moment, staring at the patrol car. In his mind, the wheels of his success were already in motion. The department would applaud his efficiency. The chief would promote him for taking down the kingpin, and the pay raise would follow. He had won. Or so he thought. The sound of footsteps echoed through the station as the man who had been arrested sat quietly in the holding cell, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. He had been taken in without explanation, humiliated by an officer he assumed was merely doing his job. But as the minutes dragged on, something began to shift in the air. The tension was palpable. It wasn't long before the door to the holding cell opened, and the man was called in front of a line of officers, including the police chief himself. A quiet murmur of disbelief spread through the room as the truth began to unfold. The man, now standing tall, revealed his identity. He wasn't just another random citizen, but an undercover FBI agent. As the words left his lips, the entire station seemed to freeze. Officer Daniel, standing near the back, froze as well, his stomach churning. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. The agent's identity changed everything in an instant. This wasn't just a routine arrest. This was the start of something much bigger. The police chief, who had always trusted Daniel, looked at him with growing suspicion. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. His top officer, the man who had helped him keep the department's reputation spotless, had just framed a federal agent. The agent's cold stare locked onto Daniel's, and in that moment, Daniel knew that the game he had been playing was over. In the midst of the chaos, Officer Daniel remained eerily still, his mind racing. What he didn't know was that the FBI agent's body cam had been recording everything from the very beginning. The footage captured the entire arrest, every illegal action, every moment of abuse, every planted piece of evidence. The agent had known the risks of being exposed, but he had come prepared. His body cam had been quietly running the entire time, a silent witness to Daniel's corruption. As the body cam footage was downloaded and reviewed, the officers in the room watched in stunned silence. The agent's calm voice narrating the events contrasted sharply with the chaos of the situation. The recording didn't leave room for doubt. Daniel had planted drugs in the man's car, falsely arrested him, and had treated him like a criminal for doing nothing more than existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The footage was damning. It was undeniable evidence that could not be ignored. As the recording played on, Daniel's face grew pale, his breath shallow. Every moment of his betrayal was now captured on film, and it was only a matter of time before the police chief saw the extent of his treachery. The body cam footage wasn't just a technicality, it was the final nail in the coffin. The truth was out, and Daniel's career, built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling before his eyes. As the truth began to unravel, Officer Daniel's composure started to slip. He had spent years building a reputation, one carefully crafted with precision and deceit. But now that facade was collapsing in real time. The weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. He could feel his heart racing, his palms beginning to sweat, despite his efforts to remain calm. Every second felt like an eternity as he stood there, watching the body cam footage being played on the screen. The agent's calm, unshaken voice echoed in the room, exposing every single one of Daniel's wrongdoings. The planted drugs, the fabricated story, the humiliation of an innocent man, all laid bare. Daniel's eyes darted between the chief and the officers, each face now filled with suspicion and disbelief. He had miscalculated. He had never thought it would come to this. The body cam was his undoing, and the reality of it hit him like a freight train. Every lie, every betrayal now had proof. The weight of his guilt was suffocating, and he realized, too late, that there was no escape from the truth. As the footage continued, Daniel's thoughts turned frantic. How could he explain this away? How could he manipulate the situation as he had done so many times before? But the more he thought, the more hopeless the situation became. He wasn't just facing a reprimand or a slap on the wrist, he was facing the end of everything. His career, his life as he knew it, all crumbling before his eyes. The police chief stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the screen, watching the footage play out in front of him. His face, once full of pride as he looked at Daniel, was now twisted in disbelief. The man who had been his most trusted officer, the one he had always relied on, was no longer the same man he thought he knew. He was a fraud, a liar, and a criminal. As the video played, the chief's anger slowly began to build. First, it was a faint stirring in his chest, but soon, it consumed him. He had trusted Daniel. He had seen him as a reflection of everything that was good about the department. But now that trust felt like a betrayal, one so deep it made him sick to his stomach. The calmness with which Daniel had manipulated the situation, framing an innocent man, planting drugs, and all the while pretending to uphold the law, was beyond the chief's comprehension. The chief's fist clenched at his side, his knuckles white from the pressure. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. The footage painted a picture that no words could capture. Daniel's corruption wasn't just an isolated incident. It was systematic, cold, and calculated. It was everything the chief had been trying to prevent in the department, and it had come from within his own ranks. When the footage finally ended, the room was silent. There was no applause, no relief. Just a heavy, oppressive silence as the chief let out a slow breath. His trust had been shattered. He had failed to see what was right in front of him, and now the damage was done. Daniel had ruined everything. The department's reputation, the trust of the community, and, most painfully, the chief's faith in his own judgment. The chief stood there for a moment, not sure what to do next. He had always prided himself on being a man of justice, but in that moment, he realized that justice had to come for his own department first. Daniel's actions had betrayed everything they stood for, and now it was time to make it right. The police chief's disbelief turned to rage as the gravity of the situation set in. The room was thick with tension as he processed the betrayal laid out before him. Officer Daniel, the very man he had praised and trusted, was exposed as a traitor. The chief's usually calm demeanor cracked. His jaw clenched tightly as his hands balled into fists. For the first time in years, he felt utterly helpless. He had watched Daniel work tirelessly, believing in his integrity, but the body cam footage showed the cold reality of Daniel's actions. "You've got to be kidding me," the chief muttered, barely able to contain his fury. His voice was low but filled with an unmistakable rage. "How could you do this?" he asked, but Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. The evidence spoke for itself, and no lies could cover the depth of his betrayal. Without another word, the chief motioned to his officers. "Arrest him, now." The command was final, filled with the weight of years of trust being destroyed in a single instant. Daniel's back straightened in defiance, but the chief knew it was over. His favorite officer, the one who had once been his right hand, was now a criminal, unfit for the badge he wore. As the officers moved to arrest him, the chief's anger simmered beneath the surface. He couldn't believe that he had allowed such corruption to fester under his watch. As Daniel was led out of the room in handcuffs, the investigation into his actions began in full force. What followed was a series of revelations that shocked the department to its core. For years, Daniel had been feeding the cartel critical information. Details about ongoing operations, weaknesses in the department, and the best ways to evade capture. He had been a key figure, one of the cartel's trusted allies within the police force, ensuring that their operations continued uninterrupted. The deeper the investigation went, the more ties to the cartel were uncovered. It wasn't just the drugs. Daniel had been involved in money laundering schemes, weapons smuggling, and even using his position to intimidate witnesses who could have brought the cartel down. Every corner of the department had been compromised, and Daniel's corruption had spread like an infection. What seemed like an isolated betrayal was revealed to be the tip of a much larger iceberg, and now the cartel was exposed as well. The police department was in chaos as officers realized just how deeply they had been infiltrated. As Daniel's role in the cartel's operations came to light, the city's trust in the police force began to crumble. The very people who were supposed to protect them had been aiding and abetting the criminals they had sworn to fight. The fallout was immense, and the department was left scrambling to salvage whatever was left of its reputation. As the case moved forward, the media buzzed with anticipation. The trial of Officer Daniel was a spectacle that the city had never seen before. It wasn't just about one corrupt officer. It was about a broken system that had allowed someone like Daniel to thrive for so long. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and concerned citizens, all eager to see what would happen next. The prosecution wasted no time. The evidence against Daniel was overwhelming. His connection to the cartel, the drugs he planted on an innocent man, the body cam footage that captured everything. The charges piled up quickly. Corruption, evidence tampering, conspiracy, and aiding a criminal organization. Each charge carried its own weight, and the trial became a turning point in the city's fight against corruption. Daniel's defense, however, was determined to paint him as a hero who had been misunderstood. They argued that he had made a few mistakes, that his actions were driven by stress and pressure from the job. But the prosecution countered with cold, hard facts. The body cam footage, in particular, was damning. It showed Daniel's cold, calculated actions, betraying the very people he had sworn to protect. The trial quickly became more than just about Daniel's guilt. It was about exposing the rot within the department. As the prosecution presented its case, the courtroom grew more intense. The people who had once respected Daniel were now left wondering how they had missed the signs. But in the end, the truth was undeniable. Daniel's career was finished, and now, it was only a matter of time before the full extent of his crimes would be revealed. With Officer Daniel out of the picture, the focus shifted entirely to the cartel and its leader, the elusive kingpin who had long evaded capture. The case, once shrouded in darkness, now had a clear direction. The FBI and the police department worked hand in hand, combining the information Daniel had unintentionally helped uncover with their own resources. The cartel's operations, once carefully concealed by Daniel's secretive dealings, were now exposed for all to see. Every lead, every whisper that had once been ignored, was now being followed. It didn't take long before the police, with the help of an undercover agent, cornered the kingpin in a remote location, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The kingpin's arrest was swift and decisive. No longer protected by the inside man who had shielded him for so long, he had nowhere to hide. The capture sent shockwaves through the cartel's network, causing its members to scatter. As the kingpin was taken into custody, the remaining members of the cartel were left vulnerable, and the police quickly moved to dismantle their operations. It was a victory years in the making, and the entire department breathed a collective sigh of relief. Justice, at last, seemed within reach. The trial had been a long, drawn-out affair, but the evidence was overwhelming. Officer Daniel's fate was sealed the moment the body cam footage was played in court. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the prosecution laid out its case, detailing Daniel's corruption, his betrayal, and his involvement with the cartel. The evidence, his planted drugs, the messages between him and cartel members, his manipulations, was irrefutable. When Daniel took the stand, his once confident demeanor was gone. He stumbled through his answers, unable to answer the questions in a way that could sway the jury. His attempts at explaining his actions were feeble, and his earlier claims of misunderstanding fell flat in the face of overwhelming proof. The jury was left with little doubt about his guilt. When the verdict came down, it was swift and certain: guilty on all charges. Daniel had betrayed the very system he was sworn to protect, and now he would face the consequences. As he was led away in handcuffs, his once pristine reputation lay in tatters. The punishment for his crimes, 23 years in prison, was a stark reminder that no one, not even the so-called golden boy, was above the law. The conviction of Officer Daniel sparked an outcry that reverberated far beyond the courtroom. The city, once blind to the depth of corruption within its own police department, was now awake to the ugly reality of what had been happening under the surface. Citizens who had trusted Daniel, who had believed in his role as a protector of the community, now felt betrayed. The shockwaves of his actions sent ripples through the community, and the call for justice grew louder. Protests broke out across the city, with people demanding accountability not just for Daniel, but for the entire police department. They called for systemic change, for transparency, and for a complete overhaul of the way the department operated. The case had become a symbol of the fight against corruption and the abuse of power within law enforcement. The media covered the story extensively, and public pressure mounted as citizens, activists, and civil rights organizations rallied for reform. The calls for justice extended beyond just Daniel's conviction. The public demanded that the department be held accountable for allowing such corruption to thrive for so long. The outrage was palpable, and the city's leaders knew they had no choice but to respond. Once the pride of the police department, Officer Daniel's life unraveled in a matter of days. The courtroom conviction was just the beginning. What followed was the public fallout, where every action, every decision he made over the years was now scrutinized in the harsh light of day. The very people he had once protected now turned their backs on him, realizing that they had been fooled by a man they trusted. Daniel's downfall wasn't just personal, it was professional too. He was fired from the department immediately after his conviction, stripped of the badge he had worn for so many years. His name, once synonymous with dedication and honor, became a symbol of betrayal and dishonor. His former colleagues, many of whom had once admired him, were left in disbelief. How had they been so blind? The city, still reeling from the shock of his actions, demanded answers. People were left wondering how someone who had once been so highly regarded could have done such terrible things. The public response was swift and unforgiving. Daniels was no longer the hero the city thought he was. He was a pariah. His reputation, his career, his freedom, everything was lost in the wake of his actions. He had become the very thing he had sworn to fight against. While Daniel's life spiraled into chaos, the FBI agent who had been wrongfully arrested began to find his own redemption. Initially, the agent had been the victim of a corrupt system, framed by one of the department's most trusted officers. But now he stood tall as a symbol of justice and resilience. His identity, once hidden for the sake of an undercover operation, had been revealed, but it only added to his credibility as the key figure in dismantling the cartel. The agent's role in exposing Daniel's corruption was nothing short of heroic. His decision to wear the body cam, capturing every moment of the unlawful arrest, had been crucial in bringing down the crooked officer. But his actions didn't stop there. He worked tirelessly with the FBI and the police department to track down the remaining members of the cartel. His efforts led to the arrest of several key figures within the organization, ultimately crippling their operations. In the aftermath, the agent became a symbol of integrity and courage. His work was praised by his colleagues, by the community, and by those who had witnessed the events unfold. He was no longer just an undercover agent. He was a man who had fought back against the system, a system that had nearly destroyed him. His redemption was not just in clearing his name, but in helping to bring justice to an entire city. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on the police chief's shoulders as he watched the final moments of Daniel's downfall unfold. For years, the chief had trusted Officer Daniel more than anyone else in the department, believing that his loyalty and skills were unmatched. But as the truth emerged, the chief was left with a bitter taste of regret. He had failed to see the cracks in the system, the subtle signs that something was wrong within his own ranks. Daniel, his star officer, had been hiding a dark secret, one that had threatened the very core of the department. The chief had always prided himself on being a leader, someone who could inspire loyalty and trust. But now, he realized that his blind trust in Daniel had allowed corruption to flourish. His regret was not just personal, it was institutional. The department's reputation, built over decades, was now tarnished, and the damage had been done by the very officer he had once relied on most. Now, as the community turned on the police force, demanding accountability and change, the chief knew that his job was far from over. He had to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. He vowed to make things right, starting with a full internal audit of the department and a commitment to rooting out corruption wherever it was found. But deep down, the chief knew it wouldn't be easy. The damage caused by one man's betrayal would take years to undo. In the aftermath of Officer Daniel's fall from grace, the police department faced a crossroads. The trust that had been broken could not be easily repaired, but the city had begun to demand change, and the department had no choice but to answer. The police chief, though burdened by the weight of his past mistakes, was determined to make sure the department learned from this dark chapter. A new era of transparency, accountability, and reform began. The department was restructured, and the first step toward healing was taken with the full implementation of body cameras for every officer, mandatory anti-bias training, and a commitment to civilian oversight. Officers who had been complicit in corruption were held accountable, and a new team of dedicated law enforcement professionals took the lead. The community, once skeptical and distrustful, began to slowly rebuild its faith in the police force. As for the city itself, the ripples of change were felt in every corner. Citizens, empowered by the actions of those who stood up against corruption, began to speak out more. They organized town halls, demanding better from their leaders, and worked to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. The police department, with new leadership, made it clear that they were committed to earning back the trust that had been lost. And for those who had suffered the most, like the FBI agent who had been wrongfully arrested, justice had not only been served, but a new path forward had been created. The department's efforts to reform were a step toward ensuring that corruption would no longer be allowed to take root. The city had turned a corner, and though the road ahead would be difficult, there was a renewed sense of hope that things would be different from now on. A new beginning isn't always easy, but it's worth it. If you enjoyed our story, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to follow more stories like this.